Ukraine is attacking our sovereignty, Hungary. Kiev's alleged plans to blow up Russia's Druzhba oil pipeline are a direct threat to Budapest, Peter Zigertu has said. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky's alleged plans to blow up a Russian pipeline that supplies Hungary with oil represent a major threat to the country's energy security, Foreign Minister Peter Zigertu told journalists on Wednesday. He was commenting on a recent report by the Washington Post detailing Zelensky's alleged plan, citing leaked Pentagon documents. Speaking during a visit to Austria, Zigertu declared the idea nothing but a threat against Hungary's sovereignty. Security of energy supply is a matter of sovereignty. If someone calls for Hungary's energy supply to be made impossible, they are virtually attacking Hungary's sovereignty. The Ukrainian president reportedly proposed in February that Kiev should blow up the Russian Druzhba oil pipeline that traverses the country, in order to destroy Hungary's energy industry, which is heavily dependent on Russian oil. Last week, the Washington Post reported that Zelensky had suggested hitting targets deep within Russian territory, as well as occupying some Russian border cities to gain leverage in talks with Moscow. Zigertu also accused Kiev of being increasingly hostile towards Budapest, adding that his country would not support any more EU aid to Ukraine until relations became friendlier. The foreign minister also raised a long-standing issue, the rights of ethnic Hungarians inside Ukraine, as Budapest has insisted for years that the rights of Hungarian minorities are being violated. Most recently, Budapest criticized the way education rights have been limited for ethnic Hungarians, adding that this issue could hamper Kiev's prospects of ever joining the EU. It is obvious that the Ukrainians will only be able to move forward in the European Union accession negotiations if they guarantee that the Hungarian people will get back the rights they already had, he said. Budapest has taken a neutral stance in the ongoing conflict between Moscow and Kiev, as it refused to provide military aid to Ukraine or allow Western aid to pass through its territory. Although Hungary had largely taken part in the existing EU sanctions against Russia, it has repeatedly criticized the restrictions and opposed those that might affect its own economy. On Wednesday, Zigertu once again asked the EU to reconsider the efficacy of anti-Russian sanctions. These proposals do not bring us 1 centimeter closer to peace, he said, referring to the 11th sanctions package currently being discussed by the bloc. More in U.S. Facing financial hardship caused by inflation, Gallup poll. About 3 in 5 people in the U.S. are facing financial hardship caused by inflation, an increase from last year, according to a poll from U.S. analytics company Gallup. The inflation surge in the U.S. that started in 2021 has been pushing up the prices of daily necessities and affecting the living standards of many people. About 61% of surveyed people said rising prices have caused financial hardship for their household, which is 6 percentage points higher than the results in November 2022. About 15% of the people categorized the problem as severe. People in the lowest income groups have been impacted the most. In a separate survey, about 29% of people with an annual income of less than $40,000 said they were facing financial hardship, while only 5% of people with annual incomes of over $100,000 said the same. On the causes behind the problem, inflation was picked as the most significant factor, which far outpaces other problems like rent, debt, and healthcare. Inflation was named by 35% of surveyed adults as the top financial problem, even higher than last year's 32%. The number was only 18% in 2008. Gallup said on their website that the recent slowing of inflation has done little to help the U.S. people. More dramatic changes in prices are needed for the harm to be healed. Additionally, Gallup said the public lacks confidence in leaders to tackle the current inflation problems. Along with the financial problems, the depression rate also reached new highs in the U.S. Another Gallup poll showed that more than 29% of adults in the U.S. have been diagnosed with depression at some point in their lifetime. That's nearly 10 percentage points higher than in 2015. Sweden Democrats seek to review EU strategy, set stage for Swexit. According to Sweden's largest right-wing party, the country's numerous concessions to Brussels erode the core of national democracy and lack popular support. The strategy they propose aims to stop ceding further power and maximize Stockholm's influence. Sweden Democrat leader Jimmy Åkesson and MEP Charlie Weimers have penned an opinion piece calling for a review of Sweden's relationship with the European Union. The National Conservative Party seeks to prevent the further transfer of power to the EU and maximize Sweden's influence to achieve better negotiation results. According to the top Sweden Democrats, their country has become so malleable and loses so many negotiations in Brussels that it has given rise to the saying "compromising like a Swede." The duo ventured that 60% of the Swedish municipalities' decisions originate within the EU, which erodes the core of Swedish democracy as it forces the parliament to make decisions that lack popular support. To remedy this, Sweden's largest right-wing party proposes 3 measures. Firstly, Sweden should legislate what has been referred to as referendum law, a law that stipulates that all significant transfers of power or new or greater demands for payments to the EU must first be approved in a popular referendum. Secondly, the government and the parliament should take measures and steps so that our country is prepared to leave the EU, in effect setting the stage for so-called Swexit when the time is right. Such preparedness should not necessarily be seen as a preparation to actually leave, but rather as a signal to counterparties in future negotiations that there is a limit to what can be accepted. Anyone who has ever negotiated knows that you get more if you can leave the negotiating table, the top Sweden Democrats explained. Thirdly, an investigation should be held in order to analyze how the EU's negative effects can be minimized. It should study which directives previous governments have over-implemented and propose how the legislation can be rewritten to approach the EU's minimum requirements, the top Sweden Democrats wrote. Opening that was no reason for the current minority government they support to maintain the legislation accepted by their left-wing predecessors. The Sweden Democrats used to have a strong anti-EU stance, to the point of overtly pushing for Swexit, yet softened their criticism in recent years, partly to mend fences with their newfound center-right allies, which ceased to view the National Conservative Party as a pariah and waged a meaningful cooperation. Critics of the Sweden Democrats argue that in order to gain more traction, the party has abandoned its principles and strayed from its initial positions on not only NATO and the EU, but social issues such as abortion. Disaffected maverick Sweden Democrats even formed Alternative for Sweden, which remains on more radical positions, yet is still to gain meaningful popularity. After a record showing in last year's general election, in which the Sweden Democrats finished second with 20.5% of the vote, they became key allies to the moderates-led minority government, rendering crucial parliamentary support despite receiving no cabinet posts. However, while the allies see eye to eye on a number of issues, including nuclear power and, to a lesser extent, immigration, the attitude toward the EU remains among the stumbling blocks. Chinese envoy calls for comprehensive ceasefire in Yemen. A senior Chinese diplomat on Wednesday called for efforts to strive for a comprehensive ceasefire so as to create a favorable environment for the political process in Yemen. Relevant parties have, for some time, maintained close communication on the political settlement of the Yemeni issue and strive to end the suffering of the Yemeni people. They should maintain the current momentum. Step up dialogue and consultation, set reasonable expectations and demonstrate flexibility so as to arrive at mutually acceptable solutions to outstanding issues as soon as possible, said Geng Shuang, China's deputy permanent representative to the United Nations, UN. We urge all parties in Yemen to put the interests of the people first. Adhere to the political solution, abandon military means, actively cooperate with the UN Special Envoy in order to strive for a comprehensive ceasefire promptly so that a favorable environment can be created for the political process, Geng said. Yemen's devastating conflict began in 2014, when the Iranian-backed Houthis seized the capital of Sana'a and much of northern Yemen and forced the government into exile. A Saudi-led coalition including the United Arab Emirates intervened in 2015 to try to restore the internationally recognized government to power. A unbacked truce initially took effect in April 2022 and raised hopes for a longer pause in fighting. but it ended on October 2 after just 6 months. Recent peace efforts, particularly China-brokered talks that helped restore diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran, have increased hope for a resolution to the Yemeni conflict. Yemen's warring sides had concluded several prisoner swaps in recent months, though sporadic exchanges of fire still took place in Taiz and other places. Noting China is concerned about the clashes, Geng said the international community should increase humanitarian and development investment in Yemen to stop the deterioration of the humanitarian situation. The political settlement of the Yemeni issue is certainly not separable from the regional dynamics, he said. China has all along been a promoter of security and stability, a partner for development and prosperity, and a facilitator of unity and self-improvement in the Middle East. China is ready to work with the international community in actively supporting regional countries' efforts to strengthen unity and cooperation and engage in dialogue and consultation for the sake of peace and tranquility in the region, Geng said. U.S. won't apologize for nuclear attack, White House. President Biden is visiting Hiroshima during the G7 summit hosted by Japan. U.S. President Joe Biden does not intend to make an official statement while visiting the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, his National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Wednesday. Biden will be participating with the other G7 leaders in a wreath-laying and a few other events, but this is not from his perspective, a bilateral moment, Sullivan told reporters aboard Air Force One, en route to Japan for the upcoming summit. He explained that Biden will attend as one of the G7 leaders coming to pay respects to both history and the hometown of Japanese PM Fumio Kishida. As part of the summit that starts on Friday, Kishida has scheduled a visit to the Hiroshima Memorial with the leaders of the US, UK, Canada, France, Germany, and Italy. They are supposed to lay wreaths and participate in a tree planting ceremony at the memorial, built around the only building left standing after the 1945 atomic bombing. The U.S. dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan in August 1945. Hiroshima was struck on August 6, and Nagasaki 3 days later. President Harry Truman claimed the move saved millions of lives, mainly of U.S. soldiers who would have died invading the Japanese home islands, but also Japanese soldiers and civilians. Critics have argued the bombings were entirely unnecessary, as Tokyo intended to surrender anyway. In 2016, Barack Obama became the first sitting U.S. president to visit Hiroshima. He did not apologize for the bombing. To this day, the U.S. remains the only country to have used nuclear weapons in war. Asked about Biden's intentions, National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters on Tuesday that the president will pay respects to the lives of the innocents who were killed in the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, but that the G7 trip is about the future. Biden had planned to follow up the G7 meeting with a trip to Papua New Guinea, which was presented as the first ever historic visit of a sitting U.S. president to a Pacific island. Along with his meeting with other leaders of the Quad, Australia, Japan, and India, in Sydney, this got scrapped due to the ongoing standoff with Congress about the U.S. national debt. European leaders unite in Iceland with Ukraine damages and Turkey high on agenda. European leaders are intensifying their efforts to hold Russia accountable for war crimes, and Ukraine leaders are meeting in Iceland this week for the 4th sitting of the Council of Europe. The continent's leading human rights organization, launched after World War II, gathered for a 2-day summit in Reykjavik to reaffirm its support for Ukraine and set a firm tone on widespread human rights violations. The Council of Europe summit comes days after Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky's weekend of visits with major European leaders to bolster alliances. Heads of state including German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and French President Emmanuel Macron were among the 46 member states in attendance at the Reykjavik summit. While Zelensky addressed his counterparts via video link, Ukraine Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal represented the country at the event. Gathering information on human rights abuses in Ukraine was central to the agenda, as well as how to organize the military logistics to further support Kiev and draw up a register of damages. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen described the register as an essential judicial element to ensure justice for war victims. The Register of Damages is a tool to record evidence and claims of damages, loss, and injuries incurred as a result of the conflict and Russia's sustained attacks. This week Ukraine's capital Kiev was hit by more overnight airstrikes. By the end of the meeting, the 46 countries agreed on the creation of the Register of Damages. Von der Leyen added, "I also expect the leaders to rally behind two main principles. The first principle is that we will keep supporting Ukraine, for as long as it takes. The second principle is nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine." To date, European allies have spent at least $74 billion in funding Ukraine's efforts. Along with stepping up financial support, von der Leyen committed to an increase in military stocks and training for Ukrainian soldiers. Russia quit the Council of Europe last year, preempting its expulsion after the conflict began. Discussions on Turkey's future as a member of the human rights watchdog were also tabled. Turkey, in the middle of a presidential election, also faces the boot over failing to implement a 2019 court judgment to free jailed businessman and philanthropist Osman Kavala. The 65-year-old was arrested in 2017. Kavala was in detention for more than 4 years until his trial despite widespread international criticism. His arrest and conviction drew condemnation from the European Court of Human Rights that determined there was insufficient evidence to warrant his detention. It also believed he was targeted in a bid to silence human rights defenders and the plurality of dissent against the government. The Council's Committee of Ministers have started infringement proceedings against Turkey, but have chosen to focus on dialogue for the time being. It could move to suspend Turkey's membership should the government fail to heed the human rights obligations of the Council of Europe. Children rescued in jungle weeks after plane crash, President. Some officials, however, have reportedly disputed claims of the successful operation in Colombia. Colombian President Gustavo Petro has announced that 4 children, including an 11-month-old baby, have been found alive more than 2 weeks after a plane they were traveling in crashed in dense jungle. However, reports of the successful rescue operation are said to have been disputed by defense sources. After arduous searching by our military, we have found alive the 4 children who went missing after a plane crash in Guaviare, Petro wrote in a social media post on Wednesday, describing it as a joy for the country. Some national media outlets have disputed claims of the successful rescue. According to a report in the El Espectador newspaper on Thursday, defense sources have been unable to confirm that the children have been found. Further reports have stated that the 4 children, aged 13, 9, 4, and 11 months, may have been rescued by a boatman, but there has been a delay in handing them over to officials due to the inaccessible nature of the jungle. 3 adults, one of whom was the pilot, died when a Cessna 206 plane crashed on May 1 while transporting 7 people from Araraquara in the Amazonas province to the town of San Jose del Guaviare, according to Reuters. The bodies of the 3 adults, including the children's mother, were located in and around the plane's wreckage. The pilot reported that the Cessna's engine had failed in a Mayday alert shortly before it crashed into thick jungle. A rescue operation to locate the surviving children was launched by the Colombian military, firefighters, and civil aviation officials, Reuters said. The Civil Aviation Authority said that the children had abandoned the plane wreckage and attempted to navigate the rainforest in search of rescue. Search parties had previously found various traces of the children, including discarded fruit and makeshift shelters created from jungle vegetation. Thailand's Move Forward Party forms 8-party coalition. Tittle-1 Rot, the leader of the Move Forward Party that won Thailand's election this week, officially announced the formation of an 8-party coalition government on Thursday, with a combined 313 seats, according to local broadcaster Thai PBS. PETA said the coalition has agreed to support him as the next prime minister and is working on a memorandum of understanding, MOU, that shares the mutual agenda of all parties. A prime ministerial candidate requires at least 376 votes from a joint sitting of the bicameral parliament, which includes a 500-seat House of Representatives and a 250-seat Senate, in accordance with the 2017 Constitution, which means PETA's coalition with 313 seats would still fall short of simple majority required for him to be appointed prime minister. Pita told a press conference that he was confident he could muster additional support from rivals to back his alliance and form a stable government. There is a committee and negotiation team in place to find out what I further need, the seats I need, so there is stability and no loss of balance in governing, he said. My coalition is taking shape. And we have a very clear roadmap from today and until the day I become PM, he added. Chinese Special Envoy meets with Zelensky. Li Hui visited Kiev to share Beijing's views on a political settlement to the Ukraine crisis. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has met with China's newly appointed Special Envoy for Eurasian Affairs, Li Hui, who traveled to Kiev to convey Beijing's views on a diplomatic resolution to Ukraine's conflict with Russia. According to a statement published on Thursday by the Chinese Foreign Ministry, Li held talks with Zelensky as well as the head of the Ukrainian President's office, Andrei Yermak, Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba, and representatives from several other ministries. Beijing said both sides had agreed that the recent phone call between Chinese President Xi Jinping and Zelensky had outlined the direction for future relations between their two nations, which it stated should be built on mutual respect and sincerity. During his trip, Li reiterated that Beijing is willing to serve as a peace broker to help reach a political resolution to the conflict with Russia, based on the principles outlined in a 12-point roadmap published by China in late February. There is no panacea in resolving the crisis. All parties need to start from themselves, accumulate mutual trust, and create conditions for ending the war and engaging in peace talks, Li said, according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry's statement. The Special Envoy's two-day trip to Ukraine is the first leg of a wider European tour, during which he is expected to visit Poland, France, Germany, and Russia. Beijing has explained that the trip aims to promote communication toward a political settlement of the Ukraine crisis. China's peace efforts have been welcomed by Russia as well as some European nations such as Hungary, and have been praised for acknowledging the national interests of both parties. The roadmap, however, has been criticized by some in the West. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg claimed that China lacked credibility as it has refused to condemn Russia's actions in Ukraine. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell insisted that the only thing that can be called a peace plan is Zelensky's proposal. The Ukrainian president has demanded that Russia must withdraw from territories that Kiev claims as its own, as well as pay war reparations and face an international tribunal. The Kremlin has dismissed the initiative, claiming it does not take into consideration the realities on the ground, including the new status of 4 former Ukrainian regions as part of Russia. New study finds over 1.6 million excess deaths among Black Americans over 2 decades. Black population in the U.S. experienced more than 1.63 million excess deaths and more than 80 million excess years of life lost, when compared with the white population over the last 2 decades, according to a new study published on Tuesday. After a period of progress in reducing disparities, improvements stalled, and differences between the black population and the white population worsened in 2020, according to the study published in the medical journal JAMA. From 1999 to 2020, the disproportionately higher mortality rates in black males and females resulted in 997,623 and 628,464 excess deaths, respectively, representing a loss of more than 80 million years of life, according to the study. Heart disease had the highest excess mortality rates, and the excess years of potential life lost rates were largest among infants and middle-aged adults, according to the study. Amid efforts in the U.S. to promote health equity, there is a need to assess recent progress in reducing excess deaths and years of potential life lost among the black population compared with the white population, the study said. U.S. blocks European F-16 training for Ukrainian pilots, NYT. Without Washington's approval, Kiev's Air Force can only receive lessons on language and tactics, an official has told the newspaper. The U.S. has forbidden its European allies from providing Ukrainian pilots with training on F-16 fighter jets, the New York Times has reported, citing a high-ranking official in Kiev. Without approval from Washington, The best that Ukrainian airmen can hope for are lessons on technical language and tactical training on the ground, the outlet said on Wednesday. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has been pressing his Western backers for fourth-generation F-16 warplanes for months, arguing they are crucial for defending the country's airspace amid a massive Russian missile campaign targeting military facilities and energy infrastructure. The Ukrainian leader appeared to achieve limited progress during a recent European tour, with the UK and the Netherlands announcing on Tuesday that they would work on building an international coalition to provide Kiev with everything from training to procuring F-16 jets. London announced that training will begin this summer, while Zelensky's office claimed that Belgium was also eager to help prepare Ukrainian pilots. The unnamed Ukrainian official told the NYT that four nations, including the Netherlands and Norway, have quietly signaled that they are ready to supply Ukraine with the warplanes produced by Lockheed Martin. F-16s contain classified technology, and Washington's allies must obtain special releasability permission from the Pentagon to even discuss it with outside partners such as Ukraine, a senior U.S. Defense Department official explained to the paper. Another American official told the NYT that the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden is sticking to its stance of not sending its own F-16s to Kiev. Washington is said to be concerned that the expensive jets would absorb too much of the funding allocated by the U.S. to help Kiev, and in any case the planes would not reach the battlefield in time for Ukraine's long-expected counter-offensive. However, the source did not rule out the possibility of the White House eventually issuing re-export licenses for the F-16s to European allies, which would enable them to supply the aircraft to Ukraine. Moscow has repeatedly warned that deliveries of more sophisticated weapons to Ukraine by the US and its allies could cross red lines, leading to a major escalation in the hostilities. Russia argues that the provision of arms, intelligence sharing, and training to Kiev's troops already means that Western nations are de facto parties to the conflict. Japanese lawmakers denounce nuclear wastewater plan. Japanese lawmakers rallied outside Japan's House of Representatives on Tuesday to condemn the government's plan to discharge contaminated wastewater from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant into the sea, calling it a serious breach of contract with the public. Let us recall carefully that in 2015, the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company promised to Fukushima fishermen that they would not discharge without their consent. And the fishermen have been opposing it until now. Not only fishermen, but also residents of Fukushima Prefecture, Japanese people, and overseas countries are greatly opposed to it. Even so, the Japanese government still insists on arbitrarily deciding the nuclear contaminated wastewater discharge plan, which is a breach of contract, Iwabuchi Tomo, senator in the House of Councillors, told protesters at the rally. The Japanese government previously stated that the implementation of the discharge plan was based on the consent of the local people, but they did not express their consent. Various other matters have not obtained the consent of the people and been discussed. I think the discharge of nuclear contaminated water containing a lot of radiation into the sea will become a very serious problem, Countess Yoiki, a member of the House of Representatives, told a reporter. Tomo told protesters that the discharge of nuclear contaminated water from Fukushima into the ocean is being condemned internationally and the Japanese government should listen to international opinions and properly handle the issue. At a joint press conference after the G7 ministers' meeting on climate, energy, and environment, Japanese economy, trade and industry minister Yasutoshi Nishimura said these countries welcomed the discharge plan. But the German Minister for the Environment pointed out at the conference that Germany had not said a word to welcome the release of the contaminated water. So Yasutoshi Nishimura had to make an apology. Why is this? The voices against the discharge are so strong. The nuclear contaminated water should not be discharged into the sea. Instead, the nuclear contaminated water should be stored in storage tanks. We should collect solutions from the world to develop technology that can remove tritium. We should develop technologies that can solve the problem of nuclear polluted water without discharging it into the sea, said Tomo. Also on Tuesday, Japanese citizens who are opposed to the government's plan submitted a petition to Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, demanding that the Japanese government stop the discharge of nuclear-contaminated water into the sea, disclose the types and contents of radioactive elements in the contaminated water, and come up with an alternative plan for the contaminated water as soon as possible. Kissinger changes stance on Ukraine joining NATO. Kiev has a large amount of Western-supplied arms and the least experienced leadership in Europe, the veteran U.S. politician warns. Former U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has signaled a U-turn in his views on Ukraine's prospective NATO membership. The veteran politician told The Economist that he now believes peace in Europe cannot be achieved without Ukraine joining the US-led military bloc. Last fall, Kissinger insisted that it was not a wise American policy to attempt to include Ukraine into NATO. He said the bloc's eastward expansion since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 had essentially removed Russia's historic safety belt, but insisted that was no justification for Russia's surprise attack on Ukraine. However, in his interview on Wednesday with the British outlet, the politician, who turns 100 on May 27, suggested that for the safety of Europe, it is better to have Ukraine in NATO. He acknowledged that he currently finds himself in the weird position that people say, "Look at him, he's changed his mind. Now he's for membership of Ukraine in NATO." The reason for such a shift is twofold, Kissinger said. 1. Russia is no longer the conventional threat it used to be. And, secondly, we have now armed Ukraine to a point where it will be the best armed, most modern country and with the least experienced leadership in Europe, he explained. According to the former U.S. Secretary of State, the position taken by European countries towards Kiev's membership is madly dangerous. The Europeans are saying we don't want them in NATO because they're too risky and therefore we'll arm the hell out of them and give them the most advanced weapons. How can that possibly work? He asked. Back in 2008, NATO declared that Kiev would join the bloc, but did not specify a date for that to happen. The decision to leave open the membership of Ukraine in NATO was very wrong, and unwise, Kissinger said. The possibility of Ukraine, which the Russians consider the little brother closest to them organically, or historically, being accepted into the US-led alliance became a final turning point for Russia's President Vladimir Putin when he decided to send troops to the neighboring country in February 2022, he explained. Last month, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius suggested that this is not the time to decide about Ukraine's place in NATO. He was backed by Lithuania's President Gitanas Nausėda, who said it would be too difficult to make Kiev a member of the bloc while the conflict with Moscow continues. Russia, which sees NATO's eastward expansion as a major security threat, had singled out Kiev's push to join the bloc as among the main reasons for launching its military operation in Ukraine more than a year ago. Writing on Telegram, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev claimed that despite Kissinger's vast experience, he was totally wrong to suggest that Ukrainian membership in NATO would somehow guarantee peace. Instead, it would only lead to a direct confrontation between Russia and the bloc, Medvedev insisted. If the dull-wit NATO leadership decides to welcome Kiev into the bloc, the Ukrainian nationalist regime won't give up on attempts to regain lost territories, added Medvedev, who currently serves as deputy head of Russia's Security Council. In response, Moscow would have to reply harshly with all available means, likely triggering NATO's Article 5, which states that an attack on one member equates to an attack on the entire bloc, Medvedev explained. China accuses U.S. of weaponizing tech issues. Washington's goal is to impede the development of foreign states, Beijing said. The U.S. is attacking Chinese companies and scientists as part of its efforts to foil the technological development of other countries, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Wang Wenbin claimed on Wednesday. During his regular press conference, Wang argued that the Disruptive Technology Strike Force set up by the U.S. Justice Department, DOJ, in February was designed to abuse export control regimes. The U.S. has politicized, instrumentalized, and weaponized tech issues, and sought to thwart other countries' technological advancement, Wang said. The spokesman urged the U.S. to abandon the outdated Cold War mentality, and to stop abusing judicial power to target Chinese researchers. He stressed that Beijing would firmly safeguard the lawful rights and interests of Chinese citizens. Wang's comments came after the DOJ announced on Tuesday that two unnamed former software engineers had been arrested for allegedly stealing material from U.S. tech companies in order to market it to Chinese competitors. According to the DOJ, one of the engineers is a Chinese citizen. The White House has repeatedly accused Beijing of technology theft and of using telecommunications companies such as Huawei and the video-sharing service TikTok for espionage. China has denied the allegations and accused the U.S. of trying to subvert competition in the global IT market. On Wednesday, the state of Montana enacted an all-out ban on TikTok. The service has been restricted in at least 25 other U.S. states and within the federal government, which have barred the app on official devices. Huawei was placed on a U.S. trade blacklist in 2019, with most American suppliers barred from shipping goods and technology to the company unless they were granted licenses. The measure is aimed at cutting off the Chinese company's ability to buy or design the semiconductor chips that power most of its products. Tensions between the U.S. and China, the world's two largest economies, have been on the rise as they compete for domination in key technologies, including semiconductors. In October, the Biden administration unveiled sweeping restrictions on China's ability to buy semiconductors and chip-making equipment, placing the country's companies on a list for further scrutiny. U.S. issues warning to North Korea. Pyongyang will be in violation of international law if it launches a military spy satellite, the State Department says. The U.S. State Department has said a potential North Korean satellite launch would violate international restrictions placed on the DPRK. The statement came after North Korean media revealed that Kim Jong-un had visited a facility where a spacecraft is being developed. During a press briefing on Wednesday, U.S. State Department Deputy Spokesman Vedant Patel said the launch would breach multiple UN Security Council resolutions on North Korea's ballistic missile program, which also cover rockets used for spacecraft. We have been very clear that we urge the DPRK to refrain from further threatening activity and call on Pyongyang to engage in serious and sustained diplomacy, Patel said. In terms of actions, we of course continue to have a number of tools at our disposal to hold the DPRK accountable. You have seen us take those steps and we will continue to do so. The United States currently maintains a raft of sanctions on North Korea and has threatened new penalties in the past over weapons tests. Pyongyang has insisted on its right to develop its military capabilities, arguing that its weapons, including its nuclear arsenal, are for defensive purposes, and has cited what it sees as an aggressive U.S. military posture on its border. On Tuesday, Kim met with scientists, technicians, and senior officials as he inspected the country's first military reconnaissance satellite. The North Korean leader approved an unspecified future action plan in preparation for the launch, according to the Korean Central News Agency. While unveiling the craft last month, Kim claimed the project was the most crucial primary task for the DPRK's armed forces, and said the satellite would be ready to go into orbit sometime in the coming weeks. The successful launch of a military reconnaissance satellite is an urgent request, and the government's top policy priority to strengthen our national defense capabilities, Kim said after the inspection, adding that North Korea would continue to advance its space program. Tensions between Washington and Pyongyang have soared in recent months, with the DPRK carrying out a flurry of weapons tests in retaliation for several rounds of joint US-South Korean wargames. North Korea has repeatedly condemned such exercises as rehearsal for an invasion, though the United States insists the drills pose no threat to any country. Journalist resigns after Russian writers' panel cancelled. The event was scrapped as Ukrainian authors threatened to boycott it due to potential repercussions at home. Moscow-born U.S. journalist Masha Gessen has resigned as vice president of the board of PEN America after two Russian writers were disinvited from the group's event due to the complaints made by Ukrainians. I very much believe in the mission of PEN, but I had to step down from leadership in order to not be implicated in what I think was a mistaken decision, Gessen, who writes for The New Yorker, said on Tuesday, as quoted by the New York Times. As part of Penn's annual week-long World Voices Festival, the Moscow-born journalist was slated to host a panel that involved two Russian writers, Ilya Vinyavkin and Anna Nemzer. Both of them left Russia after the launch of Moscow's military operation in Ukraine nearly a year ago, and have been described in the West as dissidents. According to organizers, the problem arose when Ukrainian writers and active-duty soldiers Artyom Chapay and Artyom Chek, who were supposed to participate in a separate panel, refused to attend the festival altogether as long as Russians were involved. They informed us in advance that they could participate with us as long as no Russians were part of the event. We mistakenly took that to mean their panel. Not the entire festival, which included more than 40 events at multiple venues, the Penn said in a statement, describing the situation as an error of interpretation. The organizers expressed sincere regret to the Russian writers and said they were ready to reschedule their event. PEN America later added that it was saddened by Jessen's resignation. PEN Ukraine, meanwhile, released a statement, arguing that it would have been immoral and in contradiction with our values to allow the Ukrainians to share a venue with the Russians. Jessen, who left Russia 10 years ago, is a vocal critic of the Russian government and has condemned the military operation in Ukraine. Ukrainian officials have repeatedly called for the broad cancellation of Russia-linked figures and of Russian culture in general. In early May, the Prima Vista Literary Festival in Tartu, Estonia, cancelled the appearance of Russian-Israeli author and translator Liner Gurulik after Ukrainian poets Olena Kuzinova and Anna Gruver said they would pull out of the event. Kuzinova argued that it was impossible to discuss the problems of Russian culture while the Russia-Ukraine conflict is ongoing.